Tonight, we begin with one of history's greatest tests of human endurance: how medieval peasants survived winter. Not the cozy, snow-dusted fantasy of holiday movies, but the raw, brutal reality of months so cold they could kill you in your sleep. This is the story of grit, ingenuity, and stubborn refusal to freeze to death. Imagine the wind howling through gaps in your walls like an angry ghost. The air inside your one-room hut is so frigid, your breath hangs in visible clouds, and the dirt floor has hardened into permafrost beneath your bare feet. You can smell the damp wool of your only tunic, the smoky residue of last night's banked fire, and the underlying scent of the livestock sharing your home. This isn't just a season, it's a siege. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the depths of a medieval winter, around the year 1340. The good news, you survived the night. The bad news, so did the lice in your straw mattress, and now you have to do it all over again. The first sensation is always the cold. It doesn't just wake you up, it assaults you. It's a deep, bone-aching chill that has seeped into the very walls of your timber and wattle hut overnight. You're sleeping in your only set of clothes, a rough wool tunic that's stiff with grime and sweat, and the threadbare blanket covering you is more symbolic than functional. It's so cold that the moisture from your breath has frozen on the wool near your face. You try to stretch, but your joints protest, creaking like an old wooden cart. You're 25 years old, but in medieval terms your body feels decades older. You blink in the pre-dawn gloom. There are no windows, just a single small opening covered by a stretched animal hide that glows faintly with the weak light of a snow-covered world outside. The wind finds the gaps around it, sending tiny, insistent drafts across the room. The fire in the central hearth is nothing but a mound of grey ash. If you banked it correctly last night, there might still be a single precious ember glowing in the heart of that pile. Your survival today and every day until spring depends on that ember. Getting out of bed is a calculated risk. The packed earth floor is frozen solid, and the shock of it on your bare feet is immediate and painful. You can see the family livestock on the other side of the single room. A cow, a few chickens, maybe a goat. Their body heat helped keep the temperature barely survivable overnight, and their steaming breath adds to the damp, fetid atmosphere. The air smells of cold earth, wood smoke, animal dung, and unwashed humanity. This isn't just your home. It's a shared survival capsule, and everyone, human and animal, is in this together. Your first mission, before you even think about food or water, is the fire. You shuffle to the hearth, your feet numb, and kneel before the ash mound. This is a moment of prayer more sincere than any you'll utter in church. With trembling, cold, stiff fingers, you carefully probe the ashes, searching for warmth. If you find a live ember, you'll gently nurse it back to life with dry kindling. Precious tinder you've hoarded like gold. If you don't, well then the real work begins. Reigniting a fire from scratch in the dead of winter is a nightmare of flint, steel and desperate hope. A process that can take hours and leave your fingers raw and bleeding. Let's assume you got lucky. A tiny orange heart glows within the ash. You cradle it with dry grass and tiny twigs, blowing on it softly until a fragile flame licks at the fuel. You add larger sticks then, if you're wealthy enough, a precious log. The fire sputters to life, its heat pitifully small against the vast cold but psychologically monumental. For now, you've won. You've stolen a few more degrees of warmth from a world that wants to take everything. This fire is now the center of your universe. It's your furnace, your cooker, your light source, your sole defense against the darkness both outside and within. You'll spend the day within a few feet of it, the entire family orbiting this tiny sun. The side of you facing the flames will be warm, perhaps even uncomfortably hot. The side facing away will remain in a deep freeze. You'll rotate slowly throughout the day, a human roast on a spit, trying to achieve some semblance of equilibrium. And this is just the first 10 minutes of your day. You haven't even confronted the frozen water bucket, the gnawing hunger in your belly, or the realization that you'll have to venture outside eventually into a world turned to iron and ice. Winter for a medieval peasant wasn't a period of rest. It was a relentless day-by-day, hour-by-hour battle against an enemy that never slept. The cold was a constant companion, a silent thief that stole heat, energy, and, if you made a single mistake, your life. Welcome to the grind. The sun isn't even up yet, and your great war for warmth has only just begun. Continuing on from that fragile victory at the hearth, the reality of your surroundings begins to press in. The fire's warmth feels like a lie when you're living in what is essentially a glorified wind tunnel with a roof. Your home itself, the very structure meant to shelter you, is fighting against you in this winter war. If you think your modern apartment is drafty, medieval peasants would like a word. Their homes weren't just drafty, they were enthusiastic participants in the cold. Most peasant houses were what historians politely call wattle and daub construction. Translation: sticks crisscrossed like a giant poorly made basket, then smeared with a charming mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, dung. They weren't trying to be gross. Dung was a cheap, sticky insulator that was always readily available, shall we say. These walls, no matter how lovingly smeared, didn't stand a chance against a proper winter storm. The cold wind found every crack, every gap where the mud had shrunken or crumbled away, and gleefully danced its way into the one-room home, swirling around and making sure you never got too comfortable. Privacy was a joke. Warmth was a theory. Character building was definitely happening. And then there was the roof. Thatched roofs looked picturesque from a distance, sure, but after a few months of rain, snow, and wind, they sagged, leaked, and occasionally let in the local wildlife. Nothing says a pleasant evening like a disoriented squirrel dropping onto your dinner from above. The thatch, while a fantastic insulator when dry, could become a heavy, sodden blanket when wet, straining the entire structure. And when the snow piled on top, the risk of collapse was a quiet, constant fear. Windows, if they existed at all, were laughably tiny and usually covered with thin, oiled animal hides or wobbly wooden shutters. Glass was so expensive that even the local lord probably couldn't afford more than a few small panes. And peasants? They were just happy if the wind didn't rip the cowhide right off the wall mid-blizzard. To make matters more grim, the floor was just compacted dirt. When it rained or snowed heavily, moisture would seep up from the ground, so technically you could say they had indoor water features. Not that they appreciated it. In winter, every step inside your own home could feel like trudging across a frozen marsh. The cold was a three-dimensional assault, from below, from above, and from every side. You were being chilled from all directions at once. But medieval peasants weren't the type to just whine and freeze. They fought back with mud, moss, and sheer stubbornness. Sealing up the house became a daily, desperate art form. You'd spend your autumn days, the so-called quiet season, preparing for the siege. Gaps in the walls were stuffed with whatever was soft, squishy, or vaguely insulating. Moss was prized. Straw, scraps of old cloth, bundles of dry grass. If it could be jammed into a hole, it was. Some particularly determined souls would daub extra layers of mud and dung over the outside of their walls as an annual winter project. Imagine standing there in the freezing weather, slapping cold, wet manure onto your own house while muttering, "This is fine, this is luxury." Because in a way, it was. That extra layer could mean the difference between waking up with frost on your blanket and waking up as a permanent part of the floor. Roof leaks were another battlefield. Peasants would plug holes in the thatch with spare bits of cloth, bundles of reeds, or in moments of true desperation, chunks of turf stolen from the nearest field. Every home eventually started to look like a slightly sad patchwork quilt made by someone who gave up halfway through. Doors and window covers, little more than wood planks hung by iron nails and sheer will, were lined with spare rags. Sometimes the window hide would be soaked in animal fat to add a little more wind resistance and a bonus aroma of mystery meat to the living space. The entire house became a testament to improvisation, a fragile shield held together by hope and whatever was lying around. This constant battle against the elements meant your home was never truly clean or dry. The packed earth floor, despite the layers of rushes or straw thrown down, was a frozen, often damp foundation for your entire life. That straw, by the way, wasn't changed often. You'd just throw fresh layers on top of the old decomposing ones. Over time, this created a fascinating ecosystem of decaying plants, fleas, spilled food, and whatever mystery creatures decided to move in. It was basically medieval carpet padding. If your carpet was alive, slightly damp, and smelled like a wet dog that had been rolling in something foul, you slept on it, you ate over it, your children played on it. It was your floor, your insulation, and your compost pile all in one. So there you are, huddled by your meager fire, your back to a wall that's partly mud, partly dung, and partly moss, your feet on a frozen floor that's slowly composting beneath you, and your head under a roof that might at any moment deposit a small animal or a stream of melted snow onto your dinner. The house groans in the wind, a sound that becomes the soundtrack to your winter. Every night was a battle between human ingenuity and the relentless, sneaky cold. One minute you were almost warm, the next a sudden gust would find the one spot you missed, slapping you awake like a frosty hand of doom. Yet somehow, through cleverness, stubbornness, and a refusal to accept slightly frozen as a permanent state of being medieval peasants patched, stuffed and muddled their way through the worst winters nature could throw at them, one muddy cold handful at a time. The house was failing you, but you were still fighting. And your next line of defense was even closer to home, the clothes on your back, which were also, unsurprisingly, trying to betray you. As if the drafty walls and frozen floor weren't enough, your next layer of defense, or rather your next betrayal, is what you're wearing. The clothes on your back aren't just uncomfortable, they're a masterclass in medieval survival logic, where dirt wasn't a sign of poverty, but a strategic, life-saving insulation system. In medieval winters, fashion wasn't about looking good, it was about not dying. Peasants weren't flipping through the latest trends. They were layering up like they were preparing for battle against the Grim Reaper himself. The rule was simple. If you owned it, you wore it, sometimes all at once. First, the basic under-tunic, a scratchy, probably not too clean linen shirt. Over that, a thicker woolen tunic. Then another, if you were lucky. Add some leggings that sagged at the knees, a rough cloak draped over your shoulders, and if you were really fortunate, a patched-up sheepskin thrown on top like a prize trophy. Congratulations. You are now approximately 10% warmer and 90% itchier. You don't just get dressed in the morning, you armor yourself in discomfort. But here's where the genius and the stench comes in. In the medieval peasant playbook, dirt wasn't just something you scrubbed off. It was practically a survival tool. As it turns out, getting grimy wasn't a sign you'd given up on life. It was tactical, strategic, dare we say, brilliant. See, winter posed a very specific problem: heat loss. Clean clothes, especially freshly laundered linen, were surprisingly terrible at keeping you warm. They were breathable, sure, but when the air temperature hovered somewhere between hypothermia and instant regret, breathable wasn't exactly a selling point. That's where dirt came in. As you trudged through day after day without washing your clothing, layers of grime, natural body oils, and good old-fashioned mud began to build up on your tunics, cloaks, and leggings. Over time, this natural armor clogged the tiny gaps in the fabric, making clothes more wind-resistant. It was like medieval weatherproofing, just smellier. Sure, you smelled like a goat who lost a bet, but guess what? You were warm. In fact, some medieval folks believed that washing yourself too often in winter could actually make you sick. Better to keep that protective holy filth barrier intact. Bathing was rare, laundry even rarer, and soap, when it existed, was reserved for serious occasions, like when the bishop showed up or maybe right before you died. Adding to the strategy, you layered your clothes without changing the ones underneath. You just threw your new layer on top of last month's. Eventually, you became a walking museum of the past 6 weeks. Every stain told the heroic story of that one time you slipped in the mud but didn't die. To outside observers, medieval peasants might have looked and smelled like they had completely given up on hygiene, but the peasants knew better. That grimy, crusty tunic was a thermal shield against death by frostbite. It wasn't glamorous, but neither was freezing to death because you wanted to smell like flowers. Besides, in a world where literally everyone stank to high heaven, you weren't offending anyone. Nose blindness was practically a civic duty. Now let's talk about your feet. Boots were a luxury many couldn't afford. Many peasants wrapped their feet in layers of cloth or old rags and stuffed them into wooden clogs. If the cold still bit through, well, you just added another rag and hoped you didn't lose a toe. The concept of a right and left shoe didn't exist. You had 2 foot-shaped blocks of wood, and you were grateful for them. And forget about washing these layers. Washing your clothes in the middle of winter meant dragging them to a frozen stream, smashing through the ice, and then waiting 2 days for your only shirt to dry, if it didn't just freeze into a tragic shirt sickle first. Most peasants wisely decided that smelling like a mix of smoke, sweat, and sheep was a small price to pay for not freezing solid. Hats, scarves, and gloves were prized treasures. A simple woolen cap could mean the difference between making it through the night or waking up with your hair frozen to the wall. Gloves were often homemade from whatever scraps of leather or fabric people could scrape together, sometimes looking more like sad puppet costumes than anything fashionable. Children were especially swaddled until they resembled overstuffed turnips waddling awkwardly around the house. The goal was to trap as much precious body heat as possible. Style, elegance, never heard of them. Warmth was the real medieval flex. So you're now a lumpy, itchy, slightly mobile laundry bag, smelling profoundly of human history. But your clothing strategy has one fatal flaw. It's static. Once you stop moving, the cold seeps back in. This is where your home's other inhabitants come into play. Remember the livestock sharing your one-room hut? That cow isn't just an asset. She's a 4-legged, cud-chewing furnace. Bringing animals indoors wasn't just a quirky village tradition. It was vital for survival. Livestock generated warmth, and in a poorly insulated hovel where the wind howled louder than your stomach, every little degree mattered. Plus, if your goat shared a wall with you, it was slightly less likely to get stolen by a neighbor in the dead of night. 2 birds, 1 stony stone. At night, the house became a chaotic living furnace. Chickens nested in corners, pigs snorted near the hearth, and cows lounged luxuriously against the walls. It wasn't glamorous. Far from it. The smells were legendary. By springtime, the perfume of a shared winter was something fierce. You didn't need to light a candle. Your nostrils were already on a wild ride. But medieval peasants developed a selective nose. They didn't complain much because they knew one uncomfortable truth. The more animals inside, the fewer frozen toes in the morning. Certain animals even had prime spots. Cows, being the biggest and warmest, usually took center stage near the family. Goats were allowed closer in for their warmth, and because goats, being goats, would find a way inside anyway. Pigs, well, pigs didn't care. They plopped down wherever they pleased, probably right in the middle of the floor. Of course, sharing your bedroom with livestock wasn't without hazards. Imagine drifting off peacefully, only to be rudely awakened by a chicken deciding your hair makes a good perch, or stepping barefoot into something suspicious first thing in the morning. Yes, medieval mornings could be full of surprises. Still, despite the noise, the smells, and the occasional hoof to the ribs, peasants understood the simple math. Cold kills, and cows cuddle whether they want to or not. In the battle against winter's icy fingers, a warm, slightly slobbery cow breath was often the deciding factor between life and death. You were dirty, you were crowded, but you were alive. And now, with your tactical filth and animal companion secured, it was time to face the most dangerous part of the day, trying to sleep. With your tactical filth secured and your animal furnaces in place, night falls with a finality that modern people can't comprehend. The fire's glow is your only defense against a darkness so complete it feels solid. This is when the real test begins. The sleeping war, where surrender means never waking up. If you thought medieval peasants spent their winters tucked into plush feather beds with embroidered quilts, think again. The reality was a bit more rustic. And by rustic, I mean let's sleep on a pile of dead plants and hope for the best. Beds in the medieval peasant world were usually a rough wooden frame, if you could afford one, covered with a big sack stuffed full of straw, hay, or old rushes. That's it. No memory foam, no orthopedic support, no five-star hotel experience. Just a crunchy, lumpy, slightly pokey mess that smelled faintly of barnyard and regret. Every toss and turn in the night brought a delightful soundtrack of crinkling straw and the occasional sharp jab from a rogue stalk. Some peasants even skipped the wooden frame altogether and just threw the straw straight onto the dirt floor, creating a luxurious ground-level sleeping experience that modern influencers would probably rebrand as earth-connected slumber. The straw mattresses weren't just uncomfortable. They were temporary biological experiments. Over time, the straw flattened, grew moldy, attracted bugs, and generally turned into a hazard zone. Changing the straw was a big event, usually done a few times a year if you were diligent, or whenever your bed started actively moving without your permission. Rushes were a popular alternative. These long grasses were spread thick on the floor, sometimes mixed with herbs like lavender or rosemary, to mask the overwhelming livestock aroma of daily life. Fresh rushes smelled lovely for about a day. After that, they became part of the muddy, trampled landscape inside the house, blending seamlessly with dirt, food scraps, and whatever else wandered in. And let's not forget the bedfellows. Fleas, lice, and other charming critters loved straw bedding almost as much as the peasants did. If you woke up scratching more than you slept, congratulations. You were living the authentic medieval experience. But here's where survival strategy kicks in hard. In medieval times, the phrase, "the more the merrier," wasn't just about parties. It was a winter survival tactic. When the fire sputtered and the freezing winds whistled through every crack, there was one surefire source of warmth, each other. And if that meant sleeping cheek to cheek with your entire family, neighbors, and possibly a very confused goose, so be it. Forget about personal space. Privacy wasn't even a concept. On the coldest nights, the goal wasn't comfort. It was don't wake up frozen to the floor. Entire households piled into the warmest corner of the house, wrapped in whatever scraps of cloth they could find, and formed what could best be described as a desperate, snoring human lasagna. Younger kids squeezed in between parents, grandparents snuggled under the outer layers, and if Cousin Ethel showed up unexpectedly, well, there was always room for one more. If you were lucky, you got to sleep in the middle, where body heat radiated from all sides. If you were unlucky, you were on the edge, the medieval equivalent of sleeping next to the door of a meat locker. And woe to the person who moved too much during the night. You shift once to get comfortable, and suddenly you've knocked Aunt Maud into the freezing draft by the wall. Congratulations, you're now the family villain. Sometimes even bedding was shared. A communal straw mattress that slowly flattened under the nightly weight of multiple generations. And because hygiene wasn't exactly winning any awards back then, let's just say it wasn't the most fragrant sleeping arrangement. But hey, when it's you versus frostbite, you stop being picky. Body heat wasn't just nice, it was strategic. Some medieval guides even recommended deliberately arranging the strongest, warmest people on the outside of the group, like human shields against the cold. Babies and frail elders were tucked deep in the center, treated like the precious little heat generators they were. This wasn't just about survival, though. Over time, it became part of daily life, part of family bonding. Long winter nights huddled together led to storytelling, singing, and undoubtedly some very interesting conversations, muffled under a shared wool blanket. But the most brilliant and desperate strategy was sleeping in shifts. When the cold bites hard enough to keep you awake, medieval peasants had a solution. Don't even pretend everyone's sleeping at once. Instead, they developed a survival strategy that today would make any military commander proud. It wasn't some grand organized system with whistles and roll calls. It was far simpler and much more desperate. Half the household stayed awake, tending to the fire and patching up stray drafts, while the other half curled up under threadbare blankets and hay, trying to catch a few precious hours of half-frozen sleep. The fire needed constant attention. Left alone, it would die down, and restarting it was about as easy as getting a stubborn donkey to dance. So someone had to be on ember patrol. And since no one wanted to get up once they were finally warmish, families rotated shifts. You dozed for a few hours, got elbowed awake, then stumbled over to the hearth to poke, prod and curse the fire back to life while trying not to step on a goat. The rotation wasn't glamorous. There were no night vision goggles, no late-night snacks, and certainly no 5 more minutes snooze buttons. Just stiff joints, heavy eyelids, and a growing resentment toward whoever snored loudest during your shift. Children old enough to hold a stick were pressed into service, learning early that in winter everyone pulled their weight or froze trying. Grandparents sometimes stayed by the fire longer, both because of their experience and, frankly, because arthritis made lying down and getting up again a monumental event. And when it was your turn to sleep, good luck, with people moving about, animals rustling, wind battering the walls, and the occasional sharp nudge from a sibling who accidentally rolled over too hard. Getting quality rest was a miracle. Yet despite the exhaustion, the system worked. Sleeping in shifts meant that there was always a set of eyes and cold, begrudging hands ready to keep the hearth alive. The embers survived, and by extension, so did the family. So there you are, sandwiched between your snoring father and a curiously warm chicken listening to the wind howl and waiting for your turn to guard the flames. Every crackle of the logs, every shift of glowing embers was a tiny promise. You're still alive. You're still warm for now, and so peasants drifted into uneasy sleep, lulled by the fire's pops and hisses, each breath forming small clouds in the frigid air beyond the fire's fragile circle. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't comfortable, but it was life, clinging to warmth by a thread of glowing coals and shared body heat, fighting the long, dark night one shivering hour at a time. As dawn finally breaks on another frozen morning, the battle for warmth gives way to an even more primal struggle. The gnawing emptiness in your gut reminds you that winter isn't just about staying warm, it's about staying alive, and your body is running on empty. Welcome to the hunger season, where every meal is a calculation and every bite a victory against starvation. You shuffle to the storage area of your one-room home, a corner where the precious food reserves are kept. The sight isn't inspiring. This is where you learn one of winter's cruelest lessons. Food preservation in the Middle Ages was basically a prayer with salt. There's no refrigerator, no freezer, no cans. Just hope that the cold air and your meager preservation methods will keep things edible until spring. Your main sustenance is what you manage to store during the abundant months. Grains, root vegetables, and if you were very lucky, some salted meat or fish. But even these are dwindling, and you're watching them disappear like sand through frozen fingers. Let's start with the cornerstone of your diet, bread. That loaf isn't the fluffy, warm baguette of your dreams. It's a dense, dark brick made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with whatever was available. Sawdust, ground acorns, even clay when times were desperate. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth that could kill you faster than the cold. So you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. You sit near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. The taste? Imagine wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But here's where medieval peasants discovered an unlikely secret weapon in their winter survival. A full stomach. Turns out, one of the best ways to fight off the cold was another scratchy wool cloak. It was stuffing yourself with something hearty and heavy right before bed. Calories meant warmth. The more your body had to digest, the more it heated itself up doing the work. It's basic medieval thermodynamics. Eat a heavy meal, generate internal heat, and maybe, just maybe, survive until morning without turning into a peasant-shaped popsicle. So what did medieval peasants pile onto their plates before a long freezing night? Think thick stews, heavy with root vegetables like turnips, onions, and parsnips. Grains were lifesavers too, oat porridge, barley gruel, or that dense, chewy rye bread. If you were especially lucky, say after a festival day or a generous slaughter, you might even get a hunk of salted pork or a slice of dried sausage thrown into the pot. This wasn't comfort food in the Instagram sense. No delicate presentation, no artisanal garnishes. It was one enormous, vaguely brown meal designed to sit in your gut like a friendly brick, slowly burning through the night and keeping you just a little bit warmer. It wasn't just about eating a lot, it was about eating smart. Foods that took longer to digest provided a slow, steady trickle of warmth. Fatty foods were particularly praised, not just for the energy they provided, but because fat burns slower than lean meat. A belly full of stew, bread, and a questionable amount of lard, peak medieval winter luxury. Parents made sure even the pickiest children ate heartily. Nobody cared if little Thomas didn't like turnips. You ate the turnips, or you shivered through the night thinking about how much you missed the turnips. Harsh but effective parenting, medieval style. Of course, heavy nighttime eating came with its own hazards. You might be warmer, but you were also risking a night of vivid, bizarre dreams, fueled by a stomach trying desperately to process an entire field's worth of cabbages. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Because in the end, peasants weren't aiming for a Michelin star meal. They were aiming to survive. And if that meant going to bed full, bloated, and breathing gently through your nose next to a steaming cow, well, that was just another night in the ongoing quest to see another frosty sunrise. But the real genius of medieval food survival wasn't just what they ate. It was how they kept it warm. Long before electric blankets and fancy heated mattress pads, peasants had to get creative if they wanted a little extra warmth at bedtime. And that's how the humble haybox and the ever-glamorous heated stone became winter's unsung heroes. The haybox sounds rustic, and it absolutely was, but the idea was pure genius. Peasants would take a sturdy wooden box, line it thickly with hay, and use it to store food that had been cooked earlier, keeping it warm for hours. Leftover stew, hot porridge, toss it into the haybox, cover it up, and it stayed hot enough for a late-night snack without needing to risk reigniting the fire. Medieval slow cookers, basically. But peasants didn't just stop at food. They realized if hay could trap the heat from a stew pot, it could also trap the heat from something even better. Rocks. Enter the era of the heated stone. Before heading to bed, someone, probably whichever unlucky child lost the family argument, would grab a flat stone and chuck it into the heart of the hearth fire. After roasting it until it was nearly too hot to touch, a fine line between helpful and third-degree burn, they'd fish it out using a stick or some old tongs. The stone, still radiating blissful warmth, would be carefully wrapped in rags tucked into an old piece of cloth or jammed into a clay pot, then slipped under the hay in the mattress or down at the foot of the bed. A medieval heating pad ready to do battle against the frozen earth. Of course, there were risks. If you didn't wrap the stone properly, congratulations, you now had a small, localized house fire. And if you dropped it on your foot, well, let's just say winter injuries weren't always caused by slipping on ice. But when everything went right, that stone provided precious, comforting warmth that could last for hours. It wasn't luxurious, but when you lived in a half-frozen hut, luxury was defined as not waking up with icicles dangling from your nose. In the grand arsenal of medieval winter survival, a hot rock tucked into some hay might not sound glamorous, but for peasants clinging to whatever heat they could find, it was a tiny miracle. So you eat your grey, mysterious stew, you drink your warm beer, you tuck your heated stone into bed with you, and you try to ignore the constant, aching hunger that's become your winter companion. The food doesn't nourish you so much as it tests you. Every bite is a risk, every meal a calculation in the brutal mathematics of survival. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food wasn't about pleasure, it was about endurance. And you're still enduring one frozen, hungry day at a time. As the hunger gnaws and the endless cold wears on your spirit, you realize the most crucial truth of medieval winter. No one survives alone. Your family, your animals, your pathetic fire, they're not enough. The real secret to making it through wasn't hidden in your hut. It was woven through the entire village, a fragile web of mutual dependence that meant the difference between life and becoming just another frozen statistic. In the medieval world, survival wasn't just a family affair. It was a village project, a messy, muddy, loud collaboration where everyone's warmth and life depended on everyone else. The peasants knew that in the dead of winter, a strong fire and a pile of hay could only do so much. If your neighbor's house went dark, you noticed. If the smoke from old Tom's hearth suddenly stopped curling into the sky, someone went to check. And not just because Tom owed you a chicken, though that might be part of it, but because community meant survival. Your neighbor's frozen corpse today could be your own tomorrow. Villages had unofficial winter watchers, often the young or the elderly, who couldn't work the fields, but could keep an eye on who was coughing too hard, who hadn't come to barter at the market in a few days, or whose home looked a little too still in the morning frost. These people were the medieval version of neighborhood patrol, minus the reflective vests, plus a lot more sheep and desperation. They moved through the snow-dusted paths between hovels, their breath pluming in the air, watching, listening, knowing that in winter, silence could be deadly. If a family's fire went out, it was a near emergency. A good neighbor would rush over with a glowing coal bundled in rags, or better yet, invite them into their own smoky, overcrowded hut for the night. Yes, it meant squeezing an extra 4 bodies into an already cramped space. But it was better than finding frozen friends come spring thaw. The math was simple. More bodies equaled more heat. Your neighbour's shivering children huddled with yours, their grandparents adding their faint body warmth to the pile, their livestock mingling with yours, until the single room became a chaotic, smelly, but wonderfully warm menagerie of mutual preservation. Communal food stores played a role too. During especially brutal winters, villagers sometimes pooled their last salted meat, grain, and dried vegetables. It was grim charity. No one had much, but a few communal meals could be the difference between staggering into spring or not. The lord of the manor might occasionally distribute grain from his stores, not out of kindness, but because dead peasants couldn't plant next year's crop or pay next year's taxes. Even children understood the stakes. They helped deliver wood, shared embers, and ran urgent messages when someone needed help. No one was too small or too tired when winter came knocking. The entire village became one big stubborn family, sometimes dysfunctional, often hilarious, always fiercely determined to survive together. Sure, medieval villages weren't all sunshine and hugs. Feuds happened. Disputes over land, goats, or who borrowed whose good cooking pot never really went away. But when the nights grew deadly cold, old grudges were often quietly shelved. After all, a rival was still worth saving, because tomorrow it might be you needing rescue. That man you argued with over the property line last summer, he's the one who shows up with an armload of firewood when your supply runs low. The woman who gossiped about your daughter, she's the one who knows which herbs can soothe a winter cough. In the icy heart of winter, the village became a single organism, its survival depending on every part working together. But there was another layer to this communal survival, one that reached beyond the physical world into something deeper. When medieval peasants faced the merciless cold, they didn't just pile on cloaks or stoke the fire. They prayed a lot, because when the wind howled like wolves outside your paper-thin walls and the fire shrank into sullen embers, you wanted every possible advantage, including a little divine intervention. Faith wasn't just a Sunday affair back then. It was woven into every frozen breath, every fearful glance at the darkening sky. Before crawling under layers of straw and scratchy wool, families would kneel together, offering up hurried prayers to keep the fire burning, the roof intact, and their toes attached by mourning. Saints became more than distant holy figures. They were winter's frontline defense. St. Blaise, for instance, was called upon to protect against throat ailments, not a minor concern when one mouthful of icy air could land you coughing up your soul. St. Nicholas wasn't just the jolly gift-giver of later legend. He was also asked to protect households from sudden ruin during the lean, deadly months. Superstitions wrapped themselves snugly around daily survival. Some families sprinkled a little holy water near the hearth before sleeping, hoping it would protect against evil spirits, or at the very least, mischievous drafts. Others marked doorways with blessed chalk after certain feast days, pleading for warmth and luck to find their way inside. Candles played a role too. Special vigil candles, often blessed by the local priest or the most pious old woman in the village, were sometimes kept burning throughout the night, a flickering plea against the cold darkness clawing at the walls. And of course, no serious winter prayer session was complete without a few promises. Dear Lord, if you just get us through this night, I swear I'll be kinder to my neighbour, even the one who keeps stealing our turnips. Faith wasn't some abstract comfort. It was a daily, urgent conversation. The peasants weren't asking for luxury, just survival. A little heat, a little food, and one more day to muddle through until spring broke the frozen grip on their tiny villages. It was simple, raw hope whispered into the smoky rafters, tangled in breathless prayers, and tucked under itchy blankets that somehow carried them through the endless, merciless nights of winter. So you huddled together, family, neighbors, even former enemies, sharing body heat, sharing food, sharing prayers. The village becomes your fortress, not with stone walls, but with human connection. The shared suffering creates bonds that summer arguments can't break. You learn who you can count on, who will share their last crust of bread, who will watch your children when you're ill. These relationships, forged in the crucible of winter, become as essential to survival as any fire or stored grain. The community isn't just people living nearby, it's your lifeline, your early warning system, your emergency shelter, and your reason to keep fighting when every fiber of your being wants to give up. Together, you're not just enduring winter, you're defying it. Even with community, faith, and every desperate trick in the medieval playbook, sometimes the cold still won. For all the ingenuity, prayers, and stubbornness medieval peasants threw at winter, the truth was chilling. Sometimes it wasn't enough. And when winter won, it didn't just take a few unlucky souls. It took entire families, whole villages, vanishing them into silence beneath a heavy shroud of snow and ice. You notice it first by the absence. The smoke from a neighbor's chimney stops curling into the iron-grey sky. The children who usually chase chickens through the snow don't appear. The door remains shut, day after day. The silence from that hut becomes louder than any winter storm. Everyone knows what it means, but no one wants to be the first to say it. Finally, a small group ventures over, knocking cautiously, then more forcefully. When there's no answer, they push the door open to the worst possible scene, an entire household still locked in one another's frozen embrace, as if trying to share just a little more heat until the very end. Some winters were particularly cruel, like the infamous Great Famine winter of 1315, when rains destroyed crops, livestock starved, and freezing temperatures turned an already brutal existence into a slow, grinding disaster. People were so desperate that stories whispered of eating shoe leather, bark, and in the most horrifying cases, each other. Failure to keep the fire alive wasn't just an inconvenience, it was often a death sentence. Houses themselves could collapse under the weight of heavy snow or battering ice storms. A roof giving way in the middle of a frozen night wasn't just catastrophic, it was often fatal. Dragging yourself through thigh-deep snow to beg shelter from neighbors wasn't a guarantee either, especially if those neighbors were already stretched to the breaking point. And then there was the quiet horror of frostbite. Fingers, toes, even ears blackened and died while still attached to their owners. Some villagers survived winters at the cost of their limbs, a grim badge of honor that said, "I made it through, but winter took a piece of me." The process was agonizing. First the burning pain, then numbness, then the terrifying discoloration as tissue died. There were no doctors to amputate cleanly. If the dead flesh didn't fall off on its own, you might have to persuade it. With tools, without anesthesia, the lucky ones kept their limbs but lost their usefulness, becoming burdens on families already struggling to survive. Disease loved the cold too. Starvation weakened the body, and cramped, smoky homes turned into breeding grounds for pneumonia, bronchitis, and other deadly infections. A simple cough in December could easily be a funeral by January. The winter fever could sweep through a village, leaving half the population shivering, sweating, and coughing up blood in their straw beds. The treatments were often worse than the diseases, bleeding, purging, prayers, and herbal concoctions that did nothing except make you more miserable. The line between a bad cold and a death sentence was terrifyingly thin. Children were especially vulnerable. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5, and winter was the great reaper. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope beyond a mother's desperate prayers. If a child developed a fever in January, you basically prayed and prepared a tiny grave. The sound of a small cough in the night could freeze a parent's blood faster than any winter wind. Parents would sleep with their children pressed against their bodies, trying to will their own warmth and life into their shivering forms, knowing that any night could be the last they felt that small heartbeat against their chest. The psychological toll was its own kind of death. Imagine watching your children's hunger grow as food supplies dwindle. seeing the hollow look in your spouse's eyes, feeling the relentless cold seep into your very soul until you can't remember what being warm felt like. The despair could be as deadly as any frost. Some simply gave up, stopped tending the fire, stopped eating, stopped fighting. They'd lie down in their straw beds and let the cold take them, too exhausted, too broken to continue the daily war against winter. What's most haunting isn't just the death, it's the eerie normalcy of it. People accepted that each winter, some among them, wouldn't see the thaw. Death wasn't unexpected. It was just another neighbor at the door, wrapped in frost, waiting its turn. Funerals in deep winter were rushed, grim affairs. The ground was frozen solid, so bodies were often stored wherever possible, in barns, sheds, sometimes even under snow, until the spring thaw allowed for proper burial. If you were lucky, you got a few murmured prayers from a priest. If not, you got a shallow grave dug in the only spot not frozen solid, maybe near the hearth of your own home, if your family could manage it. Yet even amid the bitter cold and constant threat, medieval peasants pressed on, stubborn, grieving, clinging to life. Because as long as there was one ember left in the hearth, one breath hanging in the frozen air, there was still a fight worth fighting. The ones who survived did so with scars, both visible and hidden, missing fingers, chronic coughs, and the permanent memory of winters that took pieces of them they could never get back. But here's the remarkable thing. They didn't just survive for themselves, they survived for the community, for the children who might see spring, for the promise that someday the snow would melt and the green would return. Every morning that you woke up still breathing was a victory, not just for you, but for everyone who depended on you. The old man who needed help fetching water, the widow who needed someone to check her fire, the children who needed to be taught how to bank embers properly. Your survival was their survival too. So you'd bury your neighbors, you'd tend your frostbite, you'd listen to the cough in your own chest, and you'd keep going, because giving up meant betraying everyone who was still fighting. The collective will to survive became stronger than any individual's despair. Winter could take your fingers, your children, your friends, but it couldn't take your place in the web of mutual dependence that kept the village alive. And so, through the darkest days, when the sun seemed like a distant memory and the cold felt eternal, you endured. Not because you were brave, but because you had to. Because someone was counting on you. Because tomorrow might be the day the wind finally shifts and the long siege of winter begins to break. After months of relentless cold, the change comes almost imperceptibly at first. The wind loses its knife's edge. The icicles along the roof begin to drip, their steady plink, 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 a sound you haven't heard since autumn. The snow retreats from around the base of your hut, revealing mud and the first brave shoots of green. Spring is coming, and you've survived. But the cost of that survival is written on your body, in your village, and in your memory forever. The first warm day feels like a miracle and a betrayal. Your body, conditioned to constant shivering, doesn't know how to process the sensation of actual warmth. The layers of clothing that kept you alive now feel suffocating. The communal sleeping arrangements that preserved body heat now feel claustrophobic. The hut that protected you from the elements now reveals its true state. The damp, the mold, the accumulated filth of months spent huddled indoors with animals and too many people. The stench that you'd grown nose-blind to suddenly becomes overwhelming as the thaw releases months of pent-up odors. Spring cleaning wasn't a pleasant ritual. It was a biological necessity. You step outside, blinking in sunlight that actually has warmth to it. The world is emerging from its frozen tomb, and so are you. But the assessment begins immediately. Who made it? Which families are missing members? Which houses stand silent? The village takes stock of the winter's toll. The graves that couldn't be dug in frozen ground now need digging. The repairs that were impossible during the deep freeze now demand attention. The thatch roofs are sagging, the walls need redaubing, and the livestock that shared your home is thin and weak from poor winter feed. Your body tells its own story of survival. You're thinner than you were in autumn, your face gaunt from months of minimal nutrition. If you're lucky, you still have all your fingers and toes. Many aren't so fortunate. The blackened tips of frostbitten digits might fall away as circulation returns, or they might remain as permanent numb reminders of nights when the cold almost won. Your cough from the smoky interior might linger for weeks, maybe become a permanent feature of your breathing. You're alive, but winter has taken its payment in flesh and health. But here's the remarkable part. You're already thinking about next winter. Survival isn't a one-time achievement. It's a cycle. The lessons of this past winter are burned into your memory, and you begin preparing for the next one almost immediately. You notice which parts of your hut stayed warmest, which insulation methods worked, which food stores lasted. You'll repair the walls differently this year, store more of certain crops, maybe even try to acquire an extra wool blanket. The knowledge gained through suffering becomes your most valuable possession, passed down to children who watched and learned and somehow survived themselves. When we look back at medieval peasants, those muddy, frost-bitten survivors of endless winters, it's tempting to see only their hardships, the cracked hands, the frozen toes, the smoke-choked huts. But buried beneath all that struggle is something far more powerful, a legacy of raw, stubborn ingenuity and unbreakable endurance. They didn't have central heating, thermal jackets, or cozy memory foam mattresses. They didn't even have the luxury of assuming they'd survive until spring. But what they did have and what they left behind was the blueprint for resilience. Every hay-stuffed mattress, every hand-banked fire, every moss-crammed wall gap was a testament to human creativity under pressure. Faced with impossible odds, they didn't collapse in despair. They adapted. They learned from the land, from each other, and from the bitter lessons carved by each brutal winter. Their communities were built on more than shared land. They were built on shared survival. They taught each other to watch over the sick, to pull resources when food ran low, to trust that helping a freezing neighbor today meant someone might help you tomorrow. They lived by the understanding that no one beats winter alone. Their faith, too, was a kind of endurance. They wove prayers into their daily lives, not just out of fear, but out of hope. Fragile, stubborn hope that tomorrow might be a little warmer, a little brighter. Hope that after 100 dark nights, spring would come again and life would find a way to push through the frozen ground. And somehow it did. Because of their sacrifices, because of their unglamorous victories, surviving one more night, one more storm, future generations thrived. Bit by frozen bit, they pushed humanity forward, enduring winters their ancestors could barely survive, until warmth and comfort became common expectations instead of distant dreams. Their blood, sweat, and ingenuity are stitched invisibly into the lives we live now. Every cozy blanket, every warm house, every lazy winter evening spent sipping tea under soft lights, all of it is the end result of countless medieval peasants refusing to give in to the cold. So the next time the wind howls outside your double-paned window, maybe spare a thought for them. The nameless, fearless ones who turned shivering survival into a living legacy. The mothers who warmed stones for their children's beds, the fathers who stayed up through the night guarding embers, the communities that shared their last crust of bread, the people who looked winter in the face year after year and said, "Not today." They didn't just survive winter, they mastered the art of endurance itself. They proved that human beings can withstand almost anything when they work together, when they innovate, when they refuse to surrender. Their story isn't just about medieval peasants. It's about the incredible resilience of the human spirit when faced with nature's worst. They fought the long, dark cold with nothing but wit, will, and each other. And in doing so, they taught us all what it truly means to survive. One ember, one breath, one stubborn heartbeat at a time, They passed their strength down through centuries until it reached you, sitting in your warm home, listening to this story. The battle against winter may look different now, but the spirit that won it, that stubborn, brilliant, unbreakable spirit that remains the same. As the last of the winter snow melts into memory and life returns to something resembling normal, the echoes of that brutal season linger not just in your body, but in your mind, in your habits, in the very way you see the world. The medieval winter didn't just end when the thaw came. It left permanent scars on the human psyche, cultural practices that would endure for centuries, and survival instincts that would echo down through generations to reach us, even in our climate-controlled modern lives. You find yourself looking at everyday objects differently now. That wool blanket isn't just fabric. It's a miracle of insulation that could have meant the difference between life and death. The fire in the hearth isn't just ambience. It's the beating heart of survival. The stored grain in the barn isn't just food. It's insurance against the great white silence of winter. The trauma of those frozen months rewires your brain. You develop what we might now call a form of seasonal PTSD. The first chill breeze of autumn doesn't just mean changing leaves. It triggers a deep, primal anxiety. Your body remembers. Your soul remembers. This psychological legacy manifests in strange ways. You become compulsively prepared. Every scrap of cloth is saved, every bit of food preserved, every piece of wood gathered with frantic urgency. You eye the sky in autumn with a watchfulness that borders on paranoia. The first frost isn't beautiful. It's a warning shot. Children born after harsh winters are given names that mean strength or endurance. Stories of the great winter become family legends, told and retold with the same gravity as biblical parables. Remember the winter of 35, the elders say, their voices hushed, when the snow piled higher than the doors and we ate nothing but turnips for 6 weeks. But the medieval winter's legacy isn't just trauma, it's innovation born of desperation. Those months of fighting cold became the foundation for technologies we take for granted today. The humble haybox that kept pottage warm evolved into the thermal cookers and slow cookers in modern kitchens. The practice of banking fires directly led to better understanding of insulation and heat retention. The desperate communal sleeping arrangements taught us about the physics of body heat and crowd warming, knowledge that would later inform everything from emergency shelter design to outdoor survival techniques. Even our language carries the ghosts of medieval winters. When we say, cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey, we're referencing the way extreme cold could cause metal to contract and cannonballs to fall off ships. But the sentiment comes from that deep ancestral memory of cold that could shrink and damage anything. When we describe someone as hardy or having good stock, we're using agricultural terms that measured a family's ability to survive winter after winter. Our modern obsession with comfort food, that's the direct descendant of the need for heavy, warming meals that could generate internal heat through the night. The medieval winter also permanently shaped family structures and social contracts. The nuclear family isolated in a suburban home would have been a death sentence in the Middle Ages. The extended family living together, multiple generations under one roof, wasn't just tradition, it was survival. The expectation that children would care for elderly parents wasn't just filial duty, it was repayment for the winters those parents kept them alive. The village's collective responsibility for its weakest members wasn't charity, it was practical necessity. These weren't choices, they were adaptations forced by the brutal reality of winter. Fast forward to today. We've conquered winter in ways medieval peasants could never have imagined. Central heating, insulated homes, grocery stores stocked year-round, down jackets that weigh ounces, but provide warmth medieval kings would have envied. But have we lost something in that comfort? The collective memory of shared struggle? The deep, visceral appreciation for simple warmth. The understanding that our survival depends on our neighbors. Look closer at our modern winter habits, and you'll see the ghosts of medieval peasants everywhere. That electric blanket on your bed. That's the direct descendant of the heated stone wrapped in rags. The thermos keeping your coffee hot for hours. That's the haybox principle refined with modern materials. The practice of weather stripping doors and windows. That's the moss and rag insulation method with a Home Depot makeover. We're still doing the same things. We've just swapped dung and straw for silicone and synthetic fibers. Our winter holidays, too, bear the unmistakable stamp of medieval survival. Christmas falling right after the winter solstice wasn't accidental. It marked the turning point, the moment when days began growing longer and hope returned. The feasting, the lighting of candles, the gathering of family, these weren't just celebrations, they were psychological warfare against the darkness and cold. The Yule log wasn't just decoration, it was a massive piece of wood meant to burn for days, a tangible promise of sustained warmth. We've kept the traditions but forgotten the life or death necessity that created them. Even our modern discomfort with being cold reveals our ancestral memory, that shiver when the thermostat drops a few degrees. That's your body remembering generations of ancestors who knew that getting too cold could mean death. Your instinct to layer clothing? That's medieval tactical dressing encoded in your DNA. Your preference for hearty stews and warm drinks in winter? That's your inner peasant still trying to stoke the internal furnace. So the next time you complain about your heating bill or groan at having to shovel snow, remember, you're the descendant of survivors. The blood of people who outlasted winters that would kill most of us today runs in your veins. The ingenuity that created heated stones and hay boxes is the same ingenuity that created smartphones and space stations. The community spirit that shared last crusts of bread is the same spirit that creates modern mutual aid networks during blizzards and power outages. We haven't lost the medieval peasants' winter survival skills. We've just upgraded them. We've traded communal sleeping for neighborhood watch groups, shared food stores for GoFundMe campaigns, and village prayers for social media support networks. The methods have changed, but the fundamental human resilience remains the same. The medieval winter didn't just test people, it forged them. It created cultures of endurance, innovation, and mutual dependence that became the foundation of modern society. The comfort we enjoy today was bought with the suffering and ingenuity of countless anonymous peasants who refused to surrender to the cold. Their legacy isn't just in history books. It's in our heated homes, our full pantries, and our collective determination to make it through another winter, whatever it may bring. We are all, in a very real sense, the children of those who survived. As we circle back to where we began, that single precious ember glowing in the ashes, the full weight of what these people endured settles in. We've journeyed through the entire arc of medieval winter survival, from the first chilling winds to the final thaw. What remains isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a testament to the raw, stubborn, beautiful will to live that defines our species. Look around your modern world with medieval eyes for just a moment. That thermostat on your wall, that's not a dial, it's a miracle. The grocery store down the street, it's not a convenience, it's a fortress against starvation. This roof over your head isn't just shelter, it's a triumph over the elements that would have made a medieval peasant weep with gratitude. We live in a world built by the lessons learned in frozen huts, by people who refused to just die quietly in the cold. The medieval peasant's winter wasn't just about survival tactics. It was about a mindset that we've largely forgotten. It was a mindset of radical interdependence, where your neighbor's survival was literally your business. It was a mindset of relentless innovation, where every scrap, every rag, every bit of moss had potential value. It was a mindset of deep seasonal awareness. where you lived in constant conversation with the natural world because ignoring it meant death. We've gained incredible comfort, but in doing so, we've lost that visceral connection to the rhythms that sustained humanity for millennia. But here's the thing, that medieval resilience isn't gone. It's just dormant, deep in our DNA, waiting to be awakened. When a blizzard knocks out the power and neighbors start checking on each other, that's the medieval village reawakening. When families huddle together during a storm, sharing resources and telling stories, that's the human lasagna reforming. When communities organize food drives or check on their elderly during a cold snap, that is the very same spirit that kept villages alive through the darkest, coldest months. The technology has changed, but the fundamental human response to crisis remains remarkably consistent. The legacy of the medieval winter survivor isn't just in history books. It's in the emergency preparedness kits we're told to keep, the winter storm warnings we actually heed, the way we instinctively stock up on bread and milk before a big snow. It's in that cozy feeling of being warm inside while it's cold outside, a feeling that would have been the absolute pinnacle of luxury to someone sleeping on a straw bed, clutching a heated stone for warmth. We are the beneficiaries of thousands of years of winter wisdom, paid for with the suffering and ingenuity of our ancestors. So, what can we really learn from these tough, resourceful, endlessly creative people? First, that comfort can make us soft, but hardship makes us smart. The medieval peasant didn't have the luxury of complaining about the cold. They had to solve it right then and there. Second, community isn't optional. It's essential for survival. The lone wolf in a medieval winter died alone. And third, that human beings are capable of enduring far more than we think possible, especially when we have no other choice. The next time you feel a chill, remember this: your body is the descendant of bodies that survived temperatures we can barely comprehend today. Your mind is the heir to minds that figured out how to keep fires burning through howling blizzards. Your spirit carries the same stubborn refusal to surrender that kept generations alive, winter after winter after winter. We began this journey with a single ember in the ashes, and we end with that same image. But now, we understand its true significance. That ember wasn't just heat, it was hope. It was determination. It was the physical manifestation of the human will to survive against impossible odds. Every time a medieval peasant nursed a dying fire back to life, they were making a powerful statement. We are still here. We are still fighting. We will see another dawn. That very same ember glows in us today, whether we recognize it or not. It's in our determination to overcome challenges, our ability to innovate in a crisis, our capacity to come together when things get hard. The medieval peasant's winter may be centuries behind us, but the lessons of that struggle are timeless. How to be resourceful when resources are scarce, how to be brave when you're terrified, and how to keep going when every instinct tells you to give up. So as we leave the medieval winter behind and return to our comfortably heated modern lives, let's carry a little of that peasant resilience with us. Let's remember that the warmth we enjoy was earned through centuries of struggle. Let's appreciate the simple miracle of a world where winter is an inconvenience rather than a life or death battle. And let's honor the memory of those tough, brilliant, stubborn survivors by living with the same fierce gratitude for every single day we're given. The final ember never really goes out. It just gets passed from generation to generation, waiting for the next time we need to remember just how strong we really are, how resourceful we can be, how deeply we're connected to each other and to all the people who came before us, fighting their own winters in their own ways. The medieval peasants won their war against winter, and in doing so, they gave us the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that no matter how cold it gets, no matter how dark the night, human warmth and human ingenuity can see us through. We are their victory. Our comfortable winters are their legacy. and that is a truth worth keeping warm for another 1,000 years. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you found this interesting, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more explorations into the past. See you next time.